The security guard's hand was shaking as he reached for his radio. It was February 3, 1978, 11:47 p.m., at NBC Studios in Burbank. Johnny Carson was live on air, midway through his monologue, and standing in the hallway, refusing to leave, was a man who wasn't supposed to be there. A man who had no appointment, no scheduled appearance, no clearance. But this wasn't just any man. This was John Wayne. And what the Duke was about to do would stop Johnny Carson mid-sentence and create the most spontaneous moment in Tonight Show history. Coming up, the 7 words John Wayne whispered that made Johnny Carson forget he was on live television. The secret telegram that arrived 48 hours earlier, and the real reason why America's toughest cowboy chose that exact night to walk through those doors unannounced. But before we dive in, I see messages all the time in the comment section that some of you didn't realize you didn't subscribe. So if you could do me a favor and double-check if you're a subscription to this channel, that would be tremendously appreciated. It's simple, it's free, and it's something anybody that watches this show frequently can do to help us keep everything going. Please do double-check if you've subscribed, and thank you so much, because in a strange way you are part of our history, and you're on this journey with us, and I appreciate you for that. Now let's get into what happened that night when the backstage door opened at 11:47 p.m. Everything Johnny Carson thought he knew about live television was about to shatter. Because walking towards stage 1 was a legend who'd made a decision that even his closest friends couldn't understand. A decision that would reveal something about friendship, mortality, and the bonds between men that words alone could never capture. The security guard Marcus Webb had worked at NBC for 19 years. He'd seen presidents walk these halls. He'd seen every major star in Hollywood. But he'd never seen this. John Wayne, 70 years old, wearing his signature Western jacket and that unmistakable Saint-Saëns hat, walking with purpose toward the studio doors. "Mr. Wayne," Marcus said, his voice barely steady. "Sir, you're not on tonight's guest list." He turned those legendary eyes toward the young security guard and smiled. That crooked smile that had defined American cinema for 5 decades. "Son," Wayne said quietly, "I'm not on anybody's list tonight. That's the point." Marcus reached for his radio to call the control room, but something in Wayne's expression stopped him. There was weight behind those eyes. Something urgent. Something that made protocol seem suddenly meaningless. "Is Johnny on stage right now?" Wayne asked. "Yes, sir. He's in the middle of his monologue." "Good." Wayne placed his large hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Then let's not interrupt him just yet. But when there's a commercial break, you tell him the Duke needs 5 minutes. Tell him it can't wait." Marcus Webb would later say that moment changed his entire understanding of courage. Because standing in that hallway was a man who'd played heroes for 50 years, and for the first time, Marcus could see past the legend to something raw and real underneath. Something was terribly wrong, and whatever it was, it had brought John Wayne to this studio at nearly midnight, unannounced, with a message that couldn't wait until morning. But what Marcus Webb didn't know, what nobody in that studio knew, was that 48 hours earlier, Johnny Carson had received a telegram that had kept him awake for 2 straight nights. It was February 1st, 1978, 3:17 in the afternoon. Johnny was in his office at NBC, reviewing notes for that night's show. His secretary knocked twice, entered without waiting for permission. The look on her face made Johnny set down his coffee. "This just arrived by courier, Mr. Carson," she said quietly. "It's marked urgent and personal." Johnny looked at the Western Union envelope. No return address, just his name and the NBC Studios address in Burbank. His hands were steady as he opened it, but what he read made the room tilt slightly. "Johnny, it's Duke. I need to tell you something in person, something I should have said years ago. I'm running out of time to say it. Don't worry, I'll find my way to you when the moment's right. Trust me on this. See you soon, Pilgrim." Duke Johnny read it 3 times. Each time the words felt heavier. "I'm running out of time." Those 5 words carried meaning that Johnny didn't want to face, because he'd heard rumors, whispers around Hollywood, that John Wayne's health was failing, that the cancer everyone thought he'd beaten in 1964 had returned, that the Duke was dying, but refused to admit it publicly. But Wayne hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't asked for anything. Until now, Johnny folded the telegram carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't tell his producers, didn't mention it to Ed McMahon. He simply waited, knowing that when the Duke said, "I'll find my way to you," he meant it. What Johnny didn't expect was that it would happen during a live broadcast. February 3, 1978, 11:43 p.m. Johnny Carson was in the middle of a joke about President Carter when he saw Fred de Cordova, his longtime producer, standing in the wings with an expression Johnny had never seen before. Fred was making a gesture, urgent, insistent. His eyes were wide. Johnny kept talking, delivered the punchline, got his laugh, but his attention was split. Something was happening backstage that was important enough to interrupt the show. During the applause, Johnny glanced at the monitor showing the control room. The director was pointing frantically toward the backstage area. Even Ed McMahon had noticed, his jovial expression replaced by confusion. Then the commercial break light flashed. "We'll be right back," Johnny said smoothly, hitting his mark perfectly despite the adrenaline suddenly flooding his system. The moment the cameras cut, Fred Cordova was at Johnny's side. "Johnny," Fred said, his voice low and urgent. "John Wayne is here." Johnny's heart stopped. "What?" "He's backstage right now. He walked in unannounced 10 minutes ago. He says he needs to talk to you on air tonight." The studio audience was chatting, unaware of the drama unfolding at the desk. The commercial would run for exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Johnny had that long to decide what to do. "Did he say why?" Johnny asked. Fred shook his head. "Just that it can't wait. I think something's really wrong." Johnny Carson had spent 16 years hosting The Tonight Show. He'd handled every kind of surprise, every unexpected moment with perfect composure. But this was different. This was Duke. "Bring him to the stage entrance," Johnny said. "Don't announce him. Don't tell the audience. When we come back from commercial, just let him walk out." Fred's eyes widened. "Johnny, that's never been done. We can't just—" "Fred." Johnny's voice was firm but quiet. "If Duke walked into this studio at midnight, asking to talk to me on air, then something matters more than protocol. Bring him out." Fred hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he nodded and disappeared into the wings. Johnny sat back in his chair. His hands were trembling slightly. He pressed them flat against the desk to steady them. Ed McMahon leaned over. "Johnny, what's going on?" "Duke's here, Ed. He's coming out in about 90 seconds, and I have no idea why." Ed's face went pale. Everyone in Hollywood knew that John Wayne had been sick, but Wayne was intensely private about his health, if he was here unannounced at nearly midnight. 30 seconds to air, the stage manager called. Johnny took a deep breath. He looked at his notes, then pushed them aside. Whatever was about to happen, notes wouldn't help. The cameras went live, and then from behind the curtain, without music, without announcement, without any of the fanfare that usually accompanied major guests, John Wayne walked onto the Tonight Show stage. The audience saw him first. A woman in the third row gasped, then another, then a man stood up, pointing toward the stage entrance. Within seconds, all 300 people in the studio were on their feet, not applauding, not cheering, or just standing in stunned silence. As John Wayne walked across the stage toward Johnny Carson's desk, Johnny stood immediately. His chair rolled backward. He walked around the desk, something he almost never did during the show. The two men met in the center of the stage. 27 million Americans were watching from their living rooms. Every single one of them saw Johnny Carson do something he'd never done in 16 years of hosting. He didn't extend his hand for a shake. He didn't smile. He didn't crack a joke. He simply looked at his friend and said, "Duke, what's wrong?" John Wayne's famous smile appeared, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can't an old friend stop by to say hello to his favorite talk show host? The audience laughed, grateful for any release of tension. But Johnny didn't laugh. He was looking at Wayne's face. Really looking. The Duke had lost weight. His jacket hung looser than it should. There were shadows under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. And something else, something in his posture that Johnny recognized, because he'd seen it before in men who were carrying unbearable weight. "Duke," Johnny said quietly, his microphone still live, his voice carrying to millions. "Tell me why you're really here." The laughter in the studio died instantly. John Wayne looked at Johnny Carson, then he looked at the audience, then at the cameras, and then he said 7 words that made time stop. "Because I needed to thank you, Johnny." Johnny Carson's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "Thank me, Duke, for what?" Wayne gestured toward the guest chair. "Mind if I sit down? This might take a minute." "Of course." Johnny helped Wayne into the chair, then sat down himself. The studio was absolutely silent. Even the crew had stopped moving. Everyone could feel it. Something extraordinary was happening. Wayne settled into the chair and looked directly at Johnny. "How long have we known each other, Johnny?" "About 17 years, Johnny said. "Since you first came on the show in '61. 17 years. Wayne nodded slowly. "And in all that time I never told you what that night meant to me. That first time I walked onto this stage." Johnny leaned forward. "Duke, you were already a legend. You'd been making movies for 30 years. What could that first appearance have possibly meant to you?" What John Wayne said next shocked everyone watching. "It saved my life, Johnny." The audience gasped. Johnny went pale. "In 1961, Wayne continued, his voice steady, but heavy with emotion, "I was in the darkest place I'd ever been. My third marriage was falling apart. The cancer surgery had left me wondering if I'd ever work again. And I was drinking myself to death in a hotel room, convinced that everything I'd built was over." You could hear a pin drop in that studio. "My agent called," Wayne said, "told me you wanted me on your new show. I almost said no. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. Broken, scared, all the things that Duke Wayne was never supposed to be." Johnny's eyes were glistening. He didn't interrupt, "But something made me say yes," Wayne continued. "Maybe stubbornness, maybe pride. I don't know. I showed up here thinking I'd do my interview, promote some movie, and go back to my hotel to finish dying slowly." Wayne paused. He took a breath. "And then I walked onto this stage. And you did something, Johnny. Something nobody else had done in years." "What did I do?" Johnny asked quietly. "You looked at me like I was a person, not a legend. You asked me real questions. You listened to my answers. You made me laugh for the first time in months. And when the cameras stopped rolling, you invited me to get coffee. You and me. Two guys just talking." Wayne's voice cracked slightly. "We talked for 3 hours that night. You told me about your struggles, your fears about whether this new show would work, your own divorces, your own doubts. And somewhere in that conversation, I realized something." He looked directly into Johnny's eyes. "I realized I wasn't alone. That even the guy who seemed to have it all figured out on camera was human underneath, was scared, was fighting battles nobody could see." A tear rolled down Johnny Carson's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "You gave me permission to be human again, Johnny, to admit I was struggling, to ask for help. I went to treatment the next week, got sober, fixed what I could fix in my life, and I've been fighting ever since." The audience was crying. The camera operators were crying. Ed McMahon had his face in his hands. "But I never told you," Wayne said. "I never said thank you. I never told you that a simple conversation over coffee saved my life." And now he stopped, composed himself. "Now I'm out of time to keep that to myself." Johnny Carson couldn't speak. For the first time in his career, words completely failed him. John Wayne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands, those legendary hands that had thrown 1,000 punches in movies, were trembling. 3 days ago, Wayne said, "My doctor told me the cancer's back everywhere. They give me maybe 6 months, maybe less." The studio erupted in gasps and sobs. Johnny's hand covered his mouth. "I've kept it quiet," Wayne continued. "Haven't told many people, because Duke Wayne doesn't do vulnerable, right? Duke Wayne is tough. He fights. He wins." He unfolded the paper in his hands. "But the truth is, I'm terrified, Johnny. I'm 70 years old, and I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life. And I realize something. If I die without telling the people who saved me that they saved me, then I've wasted whatever time I have left." Wayne looked at the camera, at the millions watching. "So, I'm here tonight to say something to America, something I should have said a long time ago." He took a breath. "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to admit that you're human and you're struggling and you don't have all the answers." His voice grew stronger. "I've spent 50 years playing the tough guy, the hero, the man who never bends, never breaks, never admits weakness. And you know what that cost me? 3 marriages, relationships with my children that I'll never get back. Spent pretending instead of living." Wayne turned back to Johnny. "But that night, 17 years ago, you showed me another way. You showed me that real strength isn't about hiding your pain. It's about sharing it. It's about being honest. It's about letting people see you." He reached across the desk and took Johnny's hand. "So thank you, Johnny Carson. Thank you for seeing past the legend to the scared man underneath. Thank you for that coffee. Thank you for that conversation. Thank you for saving my life." Johnny Carson, the man who'd interviewed presidents and celebrities and kept his composure through everything, broke down completely. He stood up, walked around the desk, and embraced John Wayne. The two men held each other while 300 people in the studio and 27 million at home watched through their tears. And for 5 full minutes, nobody said a word. When they finally separated, Johnny wiped his eyes and looked at Wayne. "Duke," Johnny said, his voice raw, "I had no idea. All these years I thought I was just another host doing another interview." "That's the thing about kindness, Johnny," Wayne replied. "The people who change lives rarely know they're doing it. They're just being decent human beings. But for the person on the receiving end, it's everything." Johnny turned to the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something we've never done on this show. We're canceling the rest of tonight's guests. Duke and I are going to sit here and talk, really talk about fear, about mortality, about what it means to be human." The audience erupted in applause. For the next 47 minutes, Johnny Carson and John Wayne had the most honest conversation ever broadcast on late-night television. They talked about Wayne's regrets, his fears about dying, his hope that sharing his truth might help someone else. They talked about Johnny's own struggles with depression, his failed marriages, the loneliness that came with fame. They talked about the masks everyone wears, how the world expects certain people to always be strong, always be perfect, always have the answers. And they talked about the freedom that comes from finally taking the mask off. Thousands of people calling just to say they were watching, that they needed to hear this, that someone they loved needed to hear this. Mental health hotlines across America reported a 300% increase in calls that night. People reaching out for help they'd been too scared to ask for. Veterans called to thank Wayne for admitting fear. Men called to thank Johnny for showing emotion. Families had conversations they'd been avoiding for years. One broadcast, one honest conversation, millions of lives touched. As the show was ending, Wayne made one final request. "Johnny," he said, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Duke. When I'm gone, I want you to keep doing what you did tonight. Keep being real. Keep showing people that it's okay to be human, because that's what saves lives. Not jokes, not entertainment, connection, honesty, truth." Johnny nodded, tears streaming again. "I promise." "And one more thing," Wayne said, a slight smile appearing. "When it's your time, when you're facing your own mortality, I want you to remember this night. I want you to remember that you don't have to face it alone, that it's okay to be scared, that being vulnerable is the bravest thing anyone can do." "I'll remember," Johnny said. "I promise I'll remember." John Wayne stood up. He shook Johnny's hand one final time. "Thank you, Pilgrim," he said, "for everything." He walked off the stage to a standing ovation that lasted for over 10 minutes. And Johnny Carson sat at his desk, unable to speak, unable to move. He changed forever by a friend who'd walked in unannounced and reminded him what truly mattered. John Wayne passed away on June 11, 1979, 16 months after that night. But what he did during that surprise visit lived on. Johnny Carson kept his promise. For the remaining 14 years of his Tonight Show run, he made space for real conversations, for vulnerability, for honesty. When celebrities came on, he asked them real questions. How are you really doing? What scares you? What do you wish you'd said to someone? The clips from that February night were played at mental health conferences, shown in therapy sessions, used to train counselors on the power of authentic human connection. The transcript was published in newspapers across the country. Letters poured in from people who'd been thinking about suicide, but decided to get help instead. From men who'd called their fathers for the first time in years. From families who'd finally started talking about the things they'd been afraid to say. In 2005, when Johnny Carson himself was dying, he gave one final interview. The reporter asked him about the most important moment of his career. "Duke's surprise visit," Johnny said, without hesitation. "That night taught me that entertainment is fine, but connection is everything. Making people laugh is good, but helping them feel less alone, that's sacred." "Do you still think about that night?" the reporter asked. Johnny smiled. "Every day, especially now. Because Duke was right. Facing mortality is terrifying, but I'm not facing it alone, and I'm not pretending to be strong when I'm scared." "What would you say to Duke if you could talk to him now?" Johnny's eyes filled with tears. "I'd say, thank you for walking in unannounced that night. Thank you for trusting me with your truth. And thank you for teaching me that the bravest thing any of us can do is admit we're human." That February night in 1978 proved something that still matters today. Real connection happens when people stop performing and start being honest. Change happens when someone is brave enough to take off their mask. Lives are saved when we admit we need help. John Wayne, the toughest cowboy in cinema history, walked onto a stage unannounced and showed the world that vulnerability is strength. Johnny Carson, the king of late-night comedy, stopped entertaining and started connecting. And 27 million people watched two legends become human. That's the power of truth. That's the power of friendship. That's the power of one honest conversation. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to be human, then share it. Share it with someone who's hiding behind a mask. Share it with someone who thinks they have to be strong all the time. Share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And subscribe to this channel for more true stories about the moments when legends stopped performing and started living. Because somewhere right now, someone needs to hear that vulnerability is courage. Someone needs permission to be honest about their struggles. Someone needs to know that real strength comes from admitting weakness. Be that person who walks in unannounced with truth. Be that person who listens without judgment. Be that person who reminds someone else they're not alone. That's what John Wayne did. That's what Johnny Carson did. That's what changed everything. Now drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me about a time when someone's honesty changed your life. Tell me about a conversation that saved you,